Welcome back to Access. I'm Ken.
And I'm Nicole.
And today we're doing the pastoral epistle of Titus. Yeah, it's one of the lesser read books, but it's got great stuff in it
Sure does.
too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Titus. Titus is a co-worker of Paul that we know about from other letters. We know about Titus from 2 Corinthians, from Galatians. So, we have a historical record of some dude named Titus with whom Paul worked. But like the other pastoral epistles, we're not really sure of the provenance or when it was written. It also has, people are confused about whether it's totally Paul or not. Again, we're not going to deal with those issues at this point. Those are for your next higher level,
next
access to, or whatever. So we'll just leave it at that. And Nicole, do you want to say anything about the themes? Pretty similar with 1 and 2 Timothy.
Yeah, it's the orderliness of ordering the church, and here you get some very explicit lists on what you have to be, or what qualifies someone to be an elder or a bishop, a presbyter, or a episcopos.
An overseer. I like the term overseer, but
I like the term undertaker.
Can you both be overseer and undertaker?
I think everyone is.
And then there's the underminer from the I am always under you, but nothing's beneath me. Anyway, one important thing about the setting, the context, is it's in Crete. And that's something that bothers people a little bit, that we don't know of a Cretan mission that Paul had from Acts. But Titus here, has gone off to Crete. And so it's the sense of Paul's talking to Titus, who's trying to start something, and Paul's giving him, I think helpful advice on
church planning 101.
And it's hard work. So we got history, we got themes. First thing we'll talk about is it's just funny, where Paul's complaining about the Cretans. He's telling Titus about how frustrating and stubborn and hard they are, and he says even their own poets say this about themselves. All Cretans are liars. Now, what's funny about this is a guy named Epimenides, who's probably around 600 BCE, before Christ. It was a Cretan philosopher who wrote this, and this is a famous logic puzzle, because Epimenides himself is a Cretan.
Therefore, he must be a liar.
But
he's saying they're liars, so are they really truth tellers?
So this is one of those, if you're up very late at night, and maybe you've had a couple of glasses of wine. I'm not recommending that, but if you have, you can think to yourself, all Cretans are liars, said the Cretan. And just think about whether that statement has truth value or not. The really important thing here is that Paul was reading Cretan philosophy. He was reading...
He's well-versed.
He is, and he has... he knows that in order to speak to a people, you have to know what that people cares about, what they're reading, what they're thinking. I think so often the church, we are worried about culture, and I know there were folks in our own congregation who on Sundays you weren't allowed to go see movies. That was blue laws, or a big deal. That culture was something to be worried about. And certainly we do want to be critical, of culture, and not just accept it without concern, because there's a lot to be concerned about. But we got to be engaged. Paul models being engaged with culture. We talked about it with Acts 17. He's talking to the philosophers there, and he quotes them. But here too, in Crete. So be engaged. Know what's going on. And what do we got next? We're going to talk about
3:1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Authority, church and state.
Okay, so in Titus 3, chapter 1, Titus chapter 3, verse 1, it says to be subject to the governing authorities, which is interesting because and we talked a little bit about like nomianism. I still can't say it. I'm combining a couple words. Anti-law people. The freedom in Christ. Now, some people would take this to mean that they are not subject to the governing authorities. Whereas Paul says here, and also in Romans 13, God put those authorities on earth, even if they're not Christian. You need to obey them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this has been a huge tension in the church.
Huge.
Back then, let's think about the context. Christians were being persecuted. What do you do? And one of the big strategies was to be a very good citizen.
Yes.
To show that they are not a threat to the empire.
And then there's another pole, just to add to that, in their own day. When we get to the book of Revelation, we will see the opposite take, where the Christian community there is calling Rome Babylon is the occupying power, and is very much subverting and is working against the authorities, is working in secret, and is living for the day when the authorities are crushed and put down.
Yeah.
And so you have, very much a two-strategy, way where Paul's kind of, no, let's just get along. And then you've got Christians who are much more oppositional.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's a really interesting tension, because I think what you find is to hold these both in tension, where you can be critical of your government, that doesn't mean you get to stop obeying. You know, like, I don't like that 23% of my taxes go to the military. That doesn't mean I don't pay that 23%. I can be critical of it, I can protest against it, I can send letters to my congressman and do all these things that I do, but that doesn't stop me from paying it.
And that's very Pauline.
It's very Pauline.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how I kind of hold that intention for my own personal life.
But then, there are other Christians out there, radical wings of the church, like we've got Mennonites, peace traditions that say, these are traditions that came out of the Protestant Reformation that say, we don't want to have anything to do with the state. The church is completely different. So the Amish, for instance, my family has a personal connection here. I had like a great uncle or great relative who, during the Civil War, he was Amish, and he actually decided to fight. He was fighting Amish. You don't hear about that often. And he was kicked out. The community absolutely would not tolerate that within the church, and so we don't do that. And so they kicked him out. In fact, that side of my family has been kind of irreligious. As I've known them, I've often wondered if it came from that act way back then. But there are traditions that do this much more radical thing to say we're not going to have anything to do with the government.
Right. And
there's sort of like between those two.
But I think still in that they don't try to stop the government. Like, they don't go and bomb the Pentagon. Like.
No, that's true. I guess like the Munster, revolt in the there was a radical wing during the Reformation that they did kind of take over a city, and then there was a big fight. But you're right. I mean, the peace traditions are peacefully trying to protest. I mean, they're not throwing over the.
You can look at the civil rights movement as a way to peacefully critique and try to change government, but still being subject to it. Like, they didn't break any laws.
Exactly.
And so I think that's.
But then talk about.